You will not speak to me like that again. I don't care who your father is.
We didn't mean to break it.
Then you take responsibility for it.
The Whitlock house looked like money that never slept. Clean lines, polished floors, fresh flowers that got replaced before they even wilted, and a silence so controlled it felt trained. The kind of place where people spoke softly, even when nothing was wrong, because they had learned that the wrong tone could cost them their job. Sade stepped through the front door with a small overnight bag in her left hand and a folder of paperwork in her right. She paused only long enough to take in the space, then she turned her eyes to the housekeeper waiting by the staircase. The housekeeper was a middle-aged woman with careful posture and tired eyes, dressed in a uniform that looked too crisp to be comfortable. Her name tag read, Maria. Her smile appeared and disappeared in the same second, like she had practiced it in a mirror but didn't trust it anymore. Miss Adiemi, Maria said, voice low. Welcome. Sade returned the greeting with a steady warmth. Thank you, Maria. You can call me Sade. Maria's shoulders loosened a fraction, like she hadn't expected permission to be human. Yes, ma'am. I mean, yes, Sade. A sound came from deeper in the house. Fast footsteps. A loud laugh. Something small hitting a wall. Maria's eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to Sade. The boys are energetic. Sade gave a calm nod, like she had already heard that word used to excuse too many things. Where are they? Maria hesitated. Just a beat too long. They're in the foyer. Sade turned, and that's when she saw them. Two identical little boys stood near a marble table that looked like it cost more than most cars. One had his hands on his hips, chin lifted like a tiny executive. The other was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, watching her like she was a contestant on a show he had already decided he didn't like. They were about 6 years old, blonde, sharp-faced, dressed in matching navy sweaters and khaki pants. They looked like they belonged in a catalog, except their eyes were too old for their age, like they had learned early that rules were flexible if you had enough power behind you. Sade could tell instantly. They weren't just mischievous, they were practiced. The boy with hands on hips took one step forward. You're the new nanny? Sade didn't shrink. She didn't rush. She didn't look to Maria for help. She met his gaze at adult level, then lowered her bag to the floor with a quiet firmness. I'm Sade, she said, clear and measured. And yes, I'm here to take care of you. The other twin pushed off the wall. We don't need you. Maria's breath caught. Two staff members near the hallway turned their heads, then quickly pretended they were busy. Everyone in the house had the same look, the look of people who had seen this movie too many times and already knew how it ended. Sade looked from one boy to the other. Okay. The first twin blinked. Okay? Sade nodded. If you truly didn't need anyone, you wouldn't be standing here waiting to see how I react. You would be doing your own laundry, making your own breakfast, and packing your own lunches. Maria's eyes widened slightly. A tiny sound came from the kitchen area, like someone swallowed a laugh and choked on it. The twins stared at Sade, surprised she didn't flinch. The second twin recovered first. We can get you fired. There it was. The line. Sade didn't show anger. She didn't show fear. She simply tilted her head like a teacher hearing a student try a shortcut. And why would you want to do that? She asked. The first twin smirked. Because our dad fires people. He fires everyone. The second twin stepped closer, voice lower, like he was sharing a secret. If we tell him you're mean, you're gone. Maria looked down at her shoes. She looked ashamed that children even knew that was an option. Sade stayed still. She didn't move backward, and she didn't move forward. She gave the twins space to be children, but not space to run the home. I'm going to tell you both something right now, she said. Your father's name might be on the mailbox, but that doesn't mean you get to treat people like toys. That doesn't mean you get to test people for sport. And that doesn't mean you get to threaten staff because you feel powerful. The first twin's smile dropped. You can't talk to us like that. Sade nodded once. I can, and I will. Because I'm not here to be liked by you. I'm here to help raise you into young men who don't think money makes them bigger than other people. Maria's throat moved like she swallowed hard. The second twin rolled his eyes. You're going to regret this. Sade smiled, but it wasn't soft. It was calm, confident, and controlled. No, you're going to regret it if you keep trying to run this house, because today is the first day I start teaching you how life works. The twins exchanged a look. They were communicating without words, like they had a shared playbook. The first twin lifted his chin again. We can scream. We can say you touched us. We can say anything. The air changed. Maria went pale. A staff member near the hallway stiffened like they wanted to disappear into the wall. Because now the boys weren't just being rude. They were weaponizing what they knew. They had learned, somehow, that words could ruin adults. Sade's eyes sharpened, not with panic, but with focus. She took a slow breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step into chaos. She brought the temperature down. You will not do that, she said. And I'm going to explain why. The twins hesitated. They expected yelling. They expected bargaining. They expected fear. Sade looked at them like she could see past the act. This house has cameras, she said calmly. You know it. I know it. Staff knows it. So if you choose to lie, you won't just be lying about me, you'll be showing the world who you are becoming. The first twin's eyes darted away. A quick tell. He hadn't thought about cameras. Sade continued, voice steady. And if you think your father's power means you can harm people without consequences, then you're the ones who will lose. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. Because the world outside this house does not bend the way you've learned it bends here. The second twin's jaw tightened. You don't know anything. Shad nodded. You're right, I don't know everything. But I know this. You two are smart, you're also hurt, and hurt kids do one of two things. They get quiet, or they get loud. You've chosen loud. The first twin snapped, We're not hurt. Sade didn't argue. She simply held his gaze. Then prove it by acting like boys who are safe inside. Boys who don't need to threaten adults to feel important. A beat passed. The foyer was still. Even the air conditioning sounded quieter, like it was listening too. The second twin scoffed, but there was less confidence behind it now. You can't make us do anything. Sade nodded again. I can't control you. That's true. But I can control what I allow in my care, and I can control what happens next. The first twin narrowed his eyes. Like what? Shad pointed gently toward the staircase. First, you will speak to Maria with respect. You will say hello properly. Then you will show me where you keep your backpacks, because I want to learn your routine. After that, we're going to wash hands and have a snack, because I can tell you've been running around on sugar and adrenaline, and your bodies need something real. The second twin laughed like it was ridiculous. We don't have to do that. Shad's tone stayed even. If you don't, you won't get screen time today. Maria blinked. That was a rule. A real rule. A rule nobody had enforced in a long time. The first twin's eyes widened. We always get screen time. Sade shrugged slightly. Not today. The twins looked toward the hallway, as if expecting a parent or an assistant to swoop in and correct Shad for daring to set limits. No one came, because no one wanted to be the person to stand between these boys and a boundary. No one wanted to be the next one fired. Sade watched them wait for rescue that didn't arrive. Then she crouched down so her eyes were level with theirs, calm as ever. I'm going to be fair, she said. You will always know what the rules are. You will always know the consequences. I won't yell. I won't insult you. I won't embarrass you. But I will not be threatened, and I will not be played with. Understood? The first twin's nostrils flared. Our dad doesn't let people talk to us like that. Sade's voice softened just a touch, not as surrender, but as honesty. Your father isn't here right now. That's part of why you're acting like this. Maria's hand flew to her mouth for half a second, then dropped. She looked around like she expected alarms. But Sade wasn't wrong, and everyone knew it. The second twin stared at Saad, something unspoken crossing his face. Not anger, not hate, recognition, like she had just said what nobody dared to say out loud. The first twin swallowed. His voice came out smaller. So what if he's not here? Sade nodded gently. Then we build something here anyway, even without him in the room. Because you deserve a home that doesn't feel like a hotel. A long pause. Then, to everyone's shock, the second twin mumbled, "Hi, Maria." Maria froze. Then she slowly looked up, eyes glassy. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. The first twin glared at his brother like he'd betrayed the team, but the fight in him faltered. Sade stood smoothly. "Good. Now show me your backpacks." The first twin opened his mouth, ready to push again. But before he could, Shad lifted a hand, not aggressive, just a signal. "And one more thing." Both boys looked at her. Sade's voice stayed calm, but it carried weight. "You do not use your father's name to intimidate people in this house again. If you do, the consequence will be bigger than screen time. Because that behavior doesn't just hurt staff. It hurts you. It teaches you the wrong kind of power." The twins stared, and the whole staff stood motionless, watching a young black woman in a simple coat and flats take control of a mansion full of fear without raising her voice once. Maria turned slightly, as if she wanted to say thank you but didn't know if she was allowed. Sade picked up her bag again, and the twins, still confused, started walking ahead. The first twin glanced back over his shoulder with a warning in his eyes. "Dad's going to hear about this." Sade nodded, completely unshaken. "I hope he does." Because Sade didn't know it yet, but upstairs, behind a closed office door, Graham Whitlock had already paused a high-level call mid-sentence, his finger hovering over the mute button, his eyes locked on a screen that showed the foyer like a stage. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't listening to investors. He was listening to his home. Graham Whitlock's office sat above the front foyer like a control room. Tall glass panels looked out over the winter-bare trees of the property, and the desk was clean in the way only wealthy men with systems could keep it. 2 monitors held charts and market movement. A third monitor showed live camera angles of the house. That third monitor was usually background noise, a habit, a risk management reflex. He rarely looked at it, not because he didn't care, because caring had started to feel like a cost he couldn't afford. He had built Whitlock and Vale into a machine that printed money, and the world rewarded him for treating life like transactions. Meetings became seasons, travel became months. He lived on planes, in boardrooms, and behind polite smiles. He came home to a mansion that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a museum inside. He told himself the boys were fine. He told himself the staff had it handled. He told himself absence wasn't the same as neglect. He told himself a lot of things. Right now, he was on a video call with 3 men in suits and 1 woman with sharp eyes. The kind of call that decided whether a new partnership would become the biggest expansion his company had ever taken on. A set of numbers sat on his screen, and every voice on the call waited for his answer. "Graham," the woman said, firm and controlled, "we need to hear your stance on the staffing restructure before we move to the final terms." Graham leaned back in his chair, one hand at his jaw, the other resting near the keyboard. "My stance is clear," he said. "Efficiency is not cruelty, it's survival. Our growth depends on lean decision-making." One of the men on the call nodded like a loyal soldier. Another tried to smile. Then the alert blinked on the third monitor. "Front foyer camera. Sound detected." That wasn't unusual, but the sound level spiked. His eyes cut toward it without thought, and he saw her, a young black woman standing in the foyer, posture straight, face calm, moving with quiet certainty while his staff looked like they wanted to evaporate, and his sons stood in front of her like 2 small kings, braced for battle. Graham's first reaction wasn't admiration. It was annoyance, not at her, at the situation, at the fact that he was about to lose time to something he paid other people to handle. He reached for the mouse to minimize the feed. Then he heard his son say, "We can get you fired." Graham's hand froze. He stared at the screen. He hadn't taught them that. He didn't believe he had, but he had taught them something close. He had taught them, with every firing and every cold decision and every time he chose business over presence, that people were replaceable. The call continued. "Graham," the woman said again, voice sharper now. "Are we aligned?" Graham's finger hit the mute button. The room went silent, except for the sound coming from the feed. His son said, "Because our dad fires people. He fires everyone." Graham's throat tightened. He watched the woman in the foyer, Sade, stand steady like she wasn't standing in the house of a man who could ruin her future with one complaint. He expected her to soften. He expected her to laugh nervously. He expected her to retreat into performance, to become sweet, to become careful, to become what people became around wealth. Instead, he heard her say, "Your father's name might be on the mailbox, but that doesn't mean you get to treat people like toys." Graham sat forward. The words hit him like a clean slap, not cruel, not emotional, just true. He watched his sons' faces shift. Confusion, resistance, surprise. He watched Maria in the background, shoulders tense, eyes lowered like she was bracing for impact. He remembered Maria. She'd been there through everything. Through the last years of his marriage, through the funeral, through the season after, when the house had been full of visitors and empty of warmth. She used to laugh sometimes. Now, she moved like a shadow. The call on his main screen continued without him. He could see lips moving. He could see names speaking. He couldn't hear a word. He didn't care. His son, the bolder one, said something that made Graham's stomach turn. "We can scream. We can say you touched us. We can say anything." Graham's heart dropped. He stared at the screen like he wanted to reach through it and pull his children back from the edge of what they were becoming. For a second, he saw the future clear as daylight. A courtroom, a headline, a ruined life. And his sons, older, still not understanding why consequences were real. Graham's jaw clenched. He expected Sade to lose her composure. He expected her to panic. He expected her to beg. But she didn't. She took a breath. Calm, controlled. She spoke about cameras, about truth, about the world outside the house. She spoke like she knew power up close and refused to be bent by it. Graham felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not because his sons were behaving, because someone had finally stepped into the gap he left and filled it with something stronger than fear. Then she said, "Your father isn't here right now. That's part of why you're acting like this." Graham flinched, like she had reached into the most private corner of his life and turned the light on. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, in recognition, because she was right, and he hated that she was right. He watched the boys obey her, slowly, reluctantly, like they were testing whether rules could exist without him. When the second twin mumbled, "Hi, Maria," Graham's throat tightened again. He saw Maria's eyes go wet. He saw her shoulders lift and fall like she had been holding her breath for months. And Graham, billionaire, CEO, boardroom predator, sat alone in a perfect office and realized something ugly. He had been paying people to keep his sons alive, but he hadn't been raising them. His eyes dropped to the corner of the screen where the clock displayed the time. He had been on this call for 36 minutes. It felt like he'd been gone from his own home for years. A small sound escaped him. Not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh, a self-disgusted breath. He looked at the mute button, and for the first time, he didn't feel like the most important man in the room. He felt like a man who had been exposed. On the call, the woman leaned forward, her mouth forming a question he couldn't hear. Graham unmuted, voice steady, face unreadable. "Apologies," he said. "I had a situation I needed to check." The woman's eyebrows lifted. "Are we continuing, Graham, or should we reschedule?" Graham looked back at the feed. Sade stood in the foyer, bag in hand, calm as if she had done this all her life. His sons were walking ahead of her, still tense, still proud, but moving. The house looked different with her in it, not softer, stronger. Graham's voice came out colder than he meant it to. "We're continuing." He tried to refocus on the call, but his attention kept snapping back to the feed, like gravity. Because now, he wasn't just hearing his sons. He was hearing the way they used his name like a weapon. He was hearing the way staff lowered their eyes like they were trained. He was hearing the gap his absence created. And he was hearing the sound of a woman refusing to accept it. As the call moved forward, Graham listened with half his brain and watched with the other half. He watched Sade guide the twins toward the staircase. He watched her pause near Maria, leaning in just enough to say something private. Maria nodded, tears restrained, gratitude contained. Then Sade turned and looked up, not toward the camera, not toward the ceiling, but up, like she could feel him listening. Graham's breath caught, because for a split second, her eyes locked toward the general direction of his office, like she was speaking to him without words. It wasn't a challenge. It was a message. This is your home. Show up. Graham stared at the screen, pulse steady but heavy. On the call, someone said, "We can finalize the partnership if we get your signature today." Graham didn't answer immediately. He watched his sons disappear from the foyer. Then he watched Maria's shoulders relax. Then he watched the foyer become still again, but not tense. Quiet. Different. Graham's fingers tapped once on his desk, a habit when he was thinking. And in his mind, the outline of what needed to happen next formed faster than any business strategy. He would have to meet Sade properly. He would have to decide how much control he was willing to give up in his own house. He would have to face the reality that his sons were learning power without learning character. He would have to choose what mattered. Graham finally spoke into the call. "You'll have my signature," he said. Then, with his face still calm, he reached for his assistant's internal line and pressed it. His assistant answered immediately. "Yes, Mr. Whitlock." Graham kept his eyes on the feed, voice low. "Clear my next hour," he said. A pause. "Sir, you have—" "Clear it," he repeated. "Yes, sir." He ended the internal call, then returned his attention to the main meeting like nothing had happened. But inside, something had, because while the people on the screen believed they were witnessing another billionaire closing another deal, Graham Whitlock was realizing the real negotiation had already started, not with investors, not with rivals, but with a woman downstairs who had just corrected his sons and held his household steady without raising her voice. And Graham Whitlock, who controlled everything else in his world, felt something he did not like. He felt challenged. He felt exposed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt awake. She corrected the billionaire's twins like she ran the house, and the shocking part was not the tone she used or the rules she set, but the fact that the entire staff stood still like they had been waiting for someone brave enough to do it. Those boys had been using their father's name like a badge and a weapon, and every nanny before her had either begged for peace or quit for sanity. Sade did neither, because she did not come into that mansion to audition for approval. She came in with standards, and she made it clear she would not be pushed around by children who had been taught that money could bend the world. Now let me ask you something real, because this is where the story starts to hit home. Have you ever been judged for having standards, or misunderstood because you refused to let people disrespect you in the name of keeping the peace? Have you ever walked into a room and felt eyes on you, not because you were doing something wrong, but because your confidence made people uncomfortable? A lot of us know that feeling, the way people watch you like they are waiting for you to shrink, especially when the room is filled with power, with privilege, with the kind of comfort that thinks it owns everything it touches. And in this house, power had names. Race shaped the way people assumed things about Sade the second she stepped in. Class shaped how they expected her to talk, how they expected her to move, how they expected her to accept what she was given. Gender shaped the way a grieving billionaire believed he could outsource love and still call it parenting. Even the children had absorbed it because they had watched adults treat their father's money like a law, and they had learned the quickest way to win was to threaten people who could not afford to fight back. But Saad was not here to be invisible, and she was not here to be underestimated. The real problem was bigger than two misbehaving twins. Those boys were not just difficult. They were grieving. They were lonely. They were angry in ways kids cannot explain, so they had turned their pain into control. They had been running off every nanny because chaos made them feel powerful, and their father had been buying silence instead of building a home. Every time someone quit, he wrote another check. Every time staff looked away, the boys learned they could do more, and the whole house learned the same lesson, the one nobody said out loud, that the Whitlock mansion was run by fear, not love. Upstairs, Graham Whitlock sat in his office, closing deals worth millions, watching a security feed like it was a business report. He muted a call that could reshape his empire, because something downstairs mattered more than numbers in that moment. He heard his sons threaten a woman like it was normal, and he heard her stand firm like she had been built for that exact moment. He listened as she spoke the truth he had avoided. and he realized he had been absent in the one place he could not afford to be absent. So here is the question that will carry us to the end. What happens when a man who controls everything finally hears the truth inside his own home, and that truth changes him? What happens when the woman he hired to keep his children in line becomes the one person brave enough to hold up a mirror to his parenting, his grief, and his habits? What happens when the twins who used to run the house meet someone who does not fear them, and their father meets someone he cannot buy, intimidate, or dismiss? Because this story is not just about a nanny correcting two spoiled kids. It is about what we do when life makes us feel small, and how people sometimes choose control when they really need connection. It is about being overlooked, being underestimated, and deciding that you will still stand tall. It is about class and race and the uncomfortable truth that people often assume the least powerful person in the room should accept the most disrespect. And it is about what changes when the person who has always been protected by wealth finally chooses to protect his home instead. If you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever been the one doing the heavy lifting while someone else took the credit, if you have ever been treated like your voice did not matter, stay with me. Because Shad walked into a mansion where her role was supposed to be simple, but what she was about to do would shift everything, starting with those twins, then their father, then the entire house. And before we go deeper, do me a quick favor, bestie. If you love strong love stories with real emotions, real growth, and satisfying endings, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to Mr. Houston Love Stories, and comment standards down below, because this one is for everybody who had to learn that peace is not the same as silence. Now let's get into it, because the next scene is where Shad's calm strength collides with Graham's world of control, and neither of them is ready for what that collision is going to reveal. Shadi followed the twins up the staircase at a steady pace, not rushing and not dragging behind. She kept the same calm energy she had in the foyer, because children could sense hesitation like smoke, and this house had been living in hesitation for too long. The hallway upstairs was quiet, in a way that felt expensive and lonely at the same time. Family photos sat framed along the wall, but they were not the warm kind. They were the polished kind, the kind taken in coordinated outfits with perfect smiles that did not reach the eyes. Shade clocked the detail without staring, because she had learned how to read a home the same way other people read a room. The twins stopped in front of a double door and looked back at her like they were waiting for permission they were not used to asking for. Shade spoke first. "Whose room is this?" The first twin lifted his chin. "Ours." Shade nodded. "All right, show me your backpacks." The second twin pointed to a corner where two identical bags sat on the floor, like they had been thrown down without care. Their lunchboxes were half open, and a small pile of papers spilled out. Worksheets and a notice from the school folded into a hard crease. Shade didn't comment yet. She simply walked over, picked up the folded notice, and placed it back on top without opening it. That could wait. Right now she needed to set the ground rules without turning this into a lecture, because kids learned through rhythm, not speeches. She turned back to them. "What are your names?" The first twin spoke quickly. "Miles." The second twin delayed half a second, as if being asked his name made him feel smaller than he wanted to be. "Mason." "Miles and Mason," Shade repeated, keeping her tone neutral but firm, letting them hear themselves as individuals instead of a matched set. "Okay. I'm going to tell you what I expect while I'm here." Miles immediately crossed his arms. "We don't have to listen." Shade leaned her shoulder lightly against the doorway, relaxed, like she had all day. "You do. You just don't like it." Mason scoffed. "You're acting like you're in charge." Shade nodded once. "I am in charge of your care. Your father hired me to keep you safe, healthy, and growing into good people. That means when I say stop, you stop. When I say clean up, you clean up. When I say apologize, you apologize. When I say take a break, you take a break." Miles's eyes narrowed. "Dad doesn't do that." Shade didn't take the bait. She kept it clean. "We're not discussing your father's style right now. We're discussing what is happening starting today." The boys looked at each other again, silent communication passing between them, like they were deciding which direction to push next. Shade held the space without fear. Then she pointed at the backpacks. "Pick them up. Put them on the desk." Miles didn't move. Mason didn't move. They stared at her, like she had asked them to hand over a crown. Sade watched them for a moment. Then she walked over, picked up both backpacks herself, and set them on the desk. She didn't do it as help. She did it as demonstration. She turned back. Now you do the next step. Open them. Show me what's inside. Mason raised his eyebrows. Why? Sade's voice stayed smooth. Because routines keep life from falling apart. And because you don't get to ignore responsibilities just because you're upset. Miles' lips curled. We're not upset. Sade gave him a look that wasn't accusing, just honest. Okay, then you should have no problem showing me your school folder. There was a pause where the boys considered whether refusing would give them power or cost them something. Sade made the cost clear, without drama. If you refuse to cooperate, she said, your afternoon changes. No screens, no treats, and we will be spending that time doing schoolwork and chores until the job is finished. Miles made a face. That's not fair. Sade didn't argue. Fair is when you know the rules before you choose. You know the rules now. Mason let out a frustrated breath and reached for his backpack, unzipping it with sharp movements like the sound might make Sade step back. Sade didn't step back. Miles followed, slower, resentment showing in every motion. Inside the bags were the usual things: pencils, crayons, a lunchbox, a small toy car, a half-eaten granola bar. But Sade noticed something else. A wrinkled note from the teacher, and another notice from the school office, both folded like someone didn't want them seen. She didn't touch them. Not yet. Instead, she focused on what mattered first. Good, Sade said. Now we're going to do something that might feel new to you. Miles looked up suspiciously. What? Sade's expression softened slightly, not in weakness, but in humanity. We're going to reset. That means you're going to wash your hands, get a real snack, and then you're going to tell me one thing each that you enjoy doing, and one thing each that you hate. Mason scoffed. Why would we tell you that? Sade didn't miss a beat. Because I can't help you if I don't know you, and because you're not just two kids who cause trouble. You're two kids with minds, hearts, and lives that matter. Miles snorted. You're doing too much. Sade smiled slightly. You've had too little. That's why we're here. The boys stared at her again, and Sade could feel the tension in them. They were not used to adults speaking to them like they were real people with feelings, but also not letting them get away with disrespect. Usually, it was one or the other. Either indulgence without structure, or structure without care. Sade was offering both. They didn't know what to do with it. A small voice came from behind them, a staff member stepping into the hallway carefully. Sade, Maria said softly, like she was afraid to disrupt the fragile order. Mr. Whitlock will be down shortly. Sade turned. Thank you, Maria. Maria looked like she wanted to say more, like she wanted to confess an entire year of stress. But all she did was nod and retreat down the hall. Miles's eyes widened. Dad's coming. Mason's face tightened, with a mixture of excitement and dread. It was subtle, but Sade caught it. Because their threats weren't just power moves. They were calls. They used their father's name because they wanted his attention, even if the only attention they knew how to get was chaos. Sade knelt slightly, so she was eye level with them again. Listen closely. Your father coming downstairs does not change the rules. It does not change what I said. It doesn't make you in charge. Miles immediately bristled. He's going to fire you. Sade's tone stayed calm, but her words had a quiet finality. If he fires me for doing my job, then that tells me what kind of home this is. But I'm not going to fear him, and I'm not going to fear you. I'm going to do what's right. Mason's eyes flickered. You're not scared. Sade shook her head. No. Miles stared at her, and the smallest crack appeared in his confidence. Why? Sade's voice softened. Not into a speech, but into something true. Because I was raised by people who taught me that respect is not something you beg for. It's something you live. And because you two deserve better than a house full of people afraid of you. The boys stayed quiet. Sade stood back up. Now wash hands. We're going downstairs. And when your father walks in, you will speak like boys who were taught manners, not boys who were taught threats. They moved, not because they suddenly loved her, but because her certainty was stronger than their chaos. As they headed down the staircase, the weight of the moment sat heavy in the air. Downstairs, somewhere beyond the foyer, a door closed with a controlled click. Footsteps followed. Slow, steady, confident. Not the footsteps of a staff member. The footsteps of the man who owned the name on the mailbox. The man whose absence had shaped his sons. And the man who had been listening the entire time. Sade felt the shift in the house before she saw him. Because homes carried energy the same way people did. This one had been holding its breath for a long time, and now it was about to exhale. Graham Whitlock stepped into the foyer like a man used to rooms shifting when he arrived. He didn't slam doors or raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence did what shouting did for other men. He wore a dark sweater over a crisp shirt, no tie, sleeves pushed slightly up like he had been working without noticing time. His hair was perfectly kept in a way that looked effortless, and his watch caught light when he moved his wrist. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharper than calm. They were the eyes of a person who studied outcomes and rarely got surprised. Sade saw him and understood instantly why people around him moved carefully. It wasn't just money, it was certainty. But she didn't lower her eyes. She stood at the base of the stairs with Miles and Mason on either side of her, not gripping their shoulders, not holding them like proof, just positioned, steady, like a teacher standing with students before a meeting. The staff lingered at a respectful distance, pretending to be busy, but listening with their whole bodies. Graham's gaze hit the twins first. Quick assessment, checking for damage, checking for tears, checking for the signs of a situation he might have to manage. The boys were quiet, not soft. Quiet. That alone made Graham's eyebrows shift slightly, the smallest crack in his controlled expression. Then his eyes moved to Sade. Sade met them. They held for a moment longer than polite people usually did, and the silence between them said more than words. Graham broke it first. "Ms. Adeyemi," he said. His voice was smooth. It was the kind of voice built for conferences, for serious rooms. It carried authority without effort. Sade didn't correct his formality yet. She answered evenly. "Mr. Whitlock." Graham looked at the twins again. "How was your day?" Miles opened his mouth like he was about to perform. Sade spoke before he could. Before they answer, she said, calm but direct, "There are a few things you need to know." The staff stiffened, because most people did not interrupt Graham Whitlock. Graham's head turned slightly, not fully, but enough to show he was listening. "Go on." Sade kept her tone respectful, not submissive. "Your sons attempted to threaten me the moment I walked in. They used your name to do it. They said you fire everyone. They implied they could accuse me of something serious as a way to control me. That part is not negotiable." The foyer went still. Miles' eyes widened. Mason's jaw tightened. Graham's face didn't change, but his eyes did. A deeper focus, a colder edge that wasn't aimed at Sade. He looked at the twins. "Is that true?" Miles shifted. "We didn't." Sade didn't speak again. She let Graham handle them. She had said her piece clearly. Mason tried a different tactic, voice innocent. She was mean. "She told us what to do." Graham's eyes stayed on him. "Answer the question." The twins looked at each other, then down. That was answer enough. Graham inhaled through his nose, slow, not anger in the loud way, anger in the controlled way. He turned back to Sade. "I apologize." Sade nodded once. "Thank you." Graham's eyes narrowed slightly. "You said they implied they could accuse you." Sade kept her voice even, clear. "Yes. And I addressed it immediately, because I need you to understand something. I will not work in a home where children are allowed to weaponize lies. Not for any salary." A small sound came from somewhere behind them, like someone quietly reacting. Maybe Maria, maybe another staff member. It didn't matter. Graham studied Sade for a long second, and Sade could feel the weight of that assessment. He was trying to figure out what kind of person she was, whether she was brave or reckless, whether she was competent or bold for attention, whether she was a risk. And Sade was doing her own assessment too. She had met men like Graham before, not in person, but in the patterns. The kind of men who believed control was love. The kind who thought money could fix what presence should have fixed. Graham finally spoke. "They've never said that before." Sade didn't accuse, she didn't soften either. I believe you. But they have learned they can threaten staff and get results. That does not happen in a vacuum. Graham's jaw tightened. Miles looked up quickly. Dad, she's lying. She's trying to get us in trouble. Sade stayed still. Graham didn't raise his voice. But when he spoke, the entire house seemed to listen. Miles, he said, do not call adults liars when you are the one who threatened them. Miles' face flushed. But Graham lifted one hand. Enough. Silence. Mason stared at his shoes. Graham looked at Sod again, and there was something in his expression that had not been there when he entered. Not softness. Respect. Still guarded. Still controlled. But present. What do you recommend? He asked. It was a simple question, but it carried weight because it meant he wasn't just correcting the boys. He was acknowledging her authority in childcare, her expertise, her right to speak. Sade answered like she had been waiting for that opening. Not eager, not smug, just prepared. I recommend you support the boundaries I set, she said. Immediately, in front of them. No exceptions. I will be fair and I will be consistent, but it will not work if you undermine it because you feel guilty or because you want to avoid conflict. Graham's eyes held hers. You're assuming I undermine boundaries. Shad didn't flinch. I'm not assuming. I'm preparing. I've worked in homes like this. The children do not behave this way unless adults have made room for it. The staff looked like they wanted to disappear because Sade was not just speaking to Graham. She was naming the truth of the house. Graham took a breath. His gaze shifted to the twins. From this moment, he said, you will treat Sade with respect. You will follow her instructions. If she sets a consequence, it stands. If you have a problem, you bring it to me calmly, and we will address it like a family. Miles looked shocked. But we... Graham's voice tightened. No. Mason's eyes lifted, and for a second, his face looked younger than 6, like a child who had been waiting to hear his father take a side. Any side. Sade spoke again, but her tone was quieter now. I also recommend we start a routine, a real one. Homework checks, screen limits, structured play, and daily time with you that is non-negotiable. Graham's eyes flickered. Daily time. Shad nodded. 10 minutes of full attention is better than 2 hours in the same room while you're on your phone. Your sons are not starving for things. They're starving for you. The words hung. Graham's face tightened in a way that looked like restraint. Sade watched him carefully. This was the moment where pride could turn him cold. This was the moment where a wealthy man could choose to feel insulted instead of informed. Graham's voice came out low. I provide for them. Shad nodded. You do, and that matters. But providing is not the same as parenting. Graham stared at her like he wasn't used to someone saying that to his face. Like he wasn't used to a black woman, in his house, with his children, naming a truth he had been avoiding. Miles tried to jump in, desperate to regain control. Dad, we don't like her. Graham looked at him calmly. You don't have to like her today. You have to respect her. Miles's mouth fell open. Mason looked at Sade, confused. So we have to do what she says. Sade didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She kept it simple. You have to do what's right. I'll guide you. Your father will support it. Graham turned to Sade again. What do you need from me right now? Sade answered without hesitation. I need you to repeat it clearly to them. If they ever threaten staff again, there will be consequences. Real consequences. And I need you to mean it. Graham's eyes held hers. Then he turned to the twins. If either of you threatens staff again, he said, you will lose privileges. Immediately. And you will apologize properly. You will also spend time doing a task that helps the home, not as punishment, but as learning. Miles swallowed hard. Mason nodded slowly, like he didn't want to. But he believed it. Sade watched the shift, not perfection, but a crack in the old pattern. A new reality forming right in front of everyone. Graham looked back at Sade, and his voice softened just slightly. Thank you for stepping in. Sade kept her tone steady. This is what you hired me for. But I'm going to say this once now so it's clear. I'm not here to be a quiet employee. I'm here to help your children grow. That requires your presence. Graham's expression tightened again, but this time it didn't harden. It settled. Understood, he said. It was only one word, but it sounded like a commitment. The twins stared at both adults, like they were witnessing something they hadn't seen before. Adults aligned. Adults united. Adults not afraid. Maria, standing near the hallway, pressed her lips together, like she was trying not to cry. And Sade, still calm, still grounded, turned slightly toward the kitchen. "Now," she said, voice warm but firm, "we're going to wash hands and have a snack. Then we're starting homework, and after that, your father is going to spend 10 minutes with you, fully present, no distractions. That's the plan." Miles looked like he wanted to argue. Mason looked like he wanted to ask if she was serious. Graham surprised everyone by answering first. "That's the plan," he said. And for the first time in a long time, the Whitlock mansion felt like a place where rules could exist without fear, and love could exist without money being the mediator. But Saad could already feel the next layer of the battle coming, because houses like this did not change without resistance, not from the children, from the adults, from the systems, from the people who benefited from Graham staying distant. Sade didn't say that out loud. She simply moved forward with the first small step. And Graham followed, not because he was used to following, but because something about Sade's calm certainty made him want to become the kind of man his sons could trust. That was the moment the Whitlock house changed, not because the twins suddenly became angels, and not because Graham suddenly transformed into a perfect father, but because someone finally spoke the truth in a home where everyone had been paid to avoid it. Sade didn't come in swinging for control. She came in with structure, dignity, and a refusal to let fear run the household. Graham didn't come downstairs to perform for staff. He came downstairs because hearing his sons use his name like a threat forced him to face what his absence had created. But a new rule in a powerful home always creates pressure, because not everyone benefits when the truth gets spoken. As Saad led the twins toward the kitchen sink, she noticed the small signs that told her this would not be simple. One staff member avoided her eyes too quickly. Another moved like they were waiting to see if she would last longer than the others. Maria watched with hope, but also with worry. The kind of worry that comes from living under a system for too long. And somewhere in the background, the house itself carried old habits, old loyalties, old comforts that didn't want to be disturbed. Graham followed them, but his face stayed thoughtful, like a man doing math in his head. He was calculating time, attention, effort, and the emotional cost of showing up. He had been trained to value what could be measured, and love didn't come with a spreadsheet. Still, he surprised himself by sitting at the kitchen table instead of hovering near his phone. He surprised himself by watching his sons wash their hands instead of dismissing the moment as small. And the twins, who had lived on loopholes, stared at their father like they were trying to figure out if this version of him was real, or if it would disappear when the next call came in. Sade opened the pantry and made a choice that felt small but mattered. She didn't reach for sugary snacks that spiked energy and crashed it later. She chose apples, peanut butter, crackers, and water. She placed the food on a plate and slid it to the center of the table like she was laying down peace in practical form. Miles stared at the plate. "We don't eat that." Sade kept her tone light, but firm. "You do today." Mason glanced at Graham, waiting to see if he would rescue them from the rule. Graham didn't. He looked at his sons and said calmly, "Eat." Miles' shoulders sank, not in defeat, in disbelief, because consequences were new. Support was new, and the scariest part for children was not discipline. It was consistency, because consistency meant the adults weren't going anywhere. As they ate, Sade watched the twins' eyes flicker between her and Graham, measuring, testing. She knew what they would try next, not loud rebellion, subtle manipulation, splitting one adult against the other, looking for the weak spot. And she also knew what might try her next. Not the kids, the world around them. The unspoken rules of a wealthy house, where staff often learned to serve comfort over truth. The social circles that would judge Sade the second they saw her standing beside Graham and his sons. The people who would assume she was replaceable, that her voice didn't count, that she should be grateful and quiet. The people who would label her before they learned her name, then act shocked when she refused to accept it. Sade didn't fear any of that, but she respected it enough to prepare, because this job was not just childcare, it was leadership, and what she was building in this home could not survive on her strength alone. Graham would have to change too, not in a dramatic overnight way, in the day-to-day choices way, in the way he responded when his sons tested him, in the way he protected his household from the people who preferred him distant, in the way he treated the woman he hired, not as a tool, but as a partner in raising human beings. Sade looked across the table at him and said one final thing before the day moved forward. 10 minutes, she reminded him, voice calm. After homework. Graham met her eyes. 10 minutes. Miles stared at them. What is 10 minutes? Sade answered gently. Time with your father. Real time. Mason swallowed. Like playing. Graham hesitated, then nodded once. Yes, like playing. The twins looked like they didn't trust it, but their faces softened in tiny ways, the way children soften when hope creeps in despite them. And that is where the real story begins, because once a home starts to change, it either grows stronger or it fights back. So stay with me, because in the next chapter, Sade's routines are going to challenge everything this household has been avoiding, and Graham is going to be forced to choose between the man he has been in public and the father his sons actually need in private. The twins will test Sade in new ways. The house will reveal who is rooting for her and who is waiting for her to fail. And Graham will learn fast that the hardest deals he ever closed were never in boardrooms. They were right here, at his own kitchen table. That was the moment the Whitlock house changed, not because the twins suddenly became angels, and not because Graham suddenly transformed into a perfect father, but because someone finally spoke the truth in a home where everyone had been paid to avoid it. Sade didn't come in swinging for control. She came in with structure, dignity, and a refusal to let fear run the household. Graham didn't come downstairs to perform for staff. He came downstairs because hearing his sons use his name like a threat forced him to face what his absence had created. But a new rule in a powerful home always creates pressure, because not everyone benefits when the truth gets spoken. As Sade led the twins toward the kitchen sink, she noticed the small signs that told her this would not be simple. One staff member avoided her eyes too quickly. Another moved like they were waiting to see if she would last longer than the others. Maria watched with hope, but also with worry, the kind of worry that comes from living under a system for too long. And somewhere in the background, the house itself carried old habits, old loyalties, old comforts that didn't want to be disturbed. Graham followed them, but his face stayed thoughtful, like a man doing math in his head. He was calculating time, attention, effort, and the emotional cost of showing up. He had been trained to value what could be measured, and love didn't come with a spreadsheet. Still, he surprised himself by sitting at the kitchen table instead of hovering near his phone. He surprised himself by watching his sons wash their hands instead of dismissing the moment as small. And the twins, who had lived on loopholes, stared at their father like they were trying to figure out if this version of him was real or if it would disappear when the next call came in. Sade opened the pantry and made a choice that felt small but mattered. She didn't reach for sugary snacks that spiked energy and crashed it later. She chose apples, peanut butter, crackers, and water. She placed the food on a plate and slid it to the center of the table like she was laying down peace in practical form. Miles stared at the plate. We don't eat that. Sade kept her tone light, but firm. You do today. Mason glanced at Graham, waiting to see if he would rescue them from the rule. Graham didn't. He looked at his sons and said calmly, Eat. Miles' shoulders sank, not in defeat, in disbelief, because consequences were new. Support was new. And the scariest part for children was not discipline. It was consistency, because consistency meant the adults weren't going anywhere. As they ate, Sade watched the twins' eyes flicker between her and Graham. Measuring, testing, she knew what they would try next. Not loud rebellion, subtle manipulation, splitting one adult against the other, looking for the weak spot. And she also knew what might try her next. Not the kids, the world around them, the unspoken rules of a wealthy house, where staff often learned to serve comfort over truth. The social circles that would judge Sade the second they saw her standing beside Graham and his sons. The people who would assume she was replaceable, that her voice didn't count, that she should be grateful and quiet. The people who would label her before they learned her name, then act shocked when she refused to accept it. Sade didn't fear any of that, but she respected it enough to prepare, because this job was not just childcare, it was leadership, and what she was building in this home could not survive on her strength alone. Graham would have to change too, not in a dramatic overnight way, in the day-to-day choices way, in the way he responded when his sons tested him, in the way he protected his household from the people who preferred him distant, in the way he treated the woman he hired, not as a tool, but as a partner in raising human beings. Sade looked across the table at him and said one final thing before the day moved forward. 10 minutes, she reminded him, voice calm. After homework. Graham met her eyes. 10 minutes. Miles stared at them. What is 10 minutes? Sade answered gently. Time with your father. Real time. Mason swallowed, like playing. Graham hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. Like playing. The twins looked like they didn't trust it, but their faces softened in tiny ways, the way children soften when hope creeps in despite them. And that is where the real story begins, because once a home starts to change, it either grows stronger or it fights back. So stay with me, because in the next chapter, Sade's routines are going to challenge everything this household has been avoiding, and Graham is going to be forced to choose between the man he has been in public and the father his sons actually need in private. The twins will test Sade in new ways. The house will reveal who is rooting for her and who is waiting for her to fail, and Graham will learn fast that the hardest deals he ever closed were never in boardrooms. They were right here, at his own kitchen table. Sade rinsed the apple slices, set them on a plate, and watched Miles and Mason chew like they were suspicious of anything that wasn't wrapped in shiny packaging. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She had learned that kids could smell a power struggle, and this house had been living on power struggles the way most homes lived on dinner. Graham sat at the kitchen table, shoulders squared, eyes moving between his sons and the woman he just realized had more backbone than most adults he employed. He looked like he was trying to be present, the way a man tried on a new suit. Not fully comfortable, but willing. Sade kept moving, calm and steady, because the next hour mattered. Homework. 10 minutes with their father, a first-day rhythm, a proof that she meant what she said upstairs and in the foyer. Still, while her hands worked, her mind went somewhere else. Somewhere warm and loud and honest. Atlanta, not the version people posted online, not the glossy skyline that looked like a promise, but the Atlanta that raised her, the one that made you greet elders with your whole chest, the one that taught you to carry yourself with pride, the one where neighbors noticed when a child was slipping and stepped in before the fall got worse. She heard it like music in her head, the sound of her aunt calling out to her from the front porch, the way the street came alive after church, the way a corner store owner remembered your name and your mama's name and still asked if you were keeping your grades up. She remembered summer heat on sidewalks, the smell of barbecue and hair grease and clean laundry, the mix of laughter and loud opinions in a kitchen where women cooked, talked, prayed, corrected, and loved in the same breath. Sade's standards didn't come from books alone. They came from people. Her grandmother, who had a voice that could cut through foolishness without ever needing to insult anyone. Her mother, who worked long shifts but still made sure her child understood the difference between confidence and arrogance. Her father, who used to say, "Respect is how you love people you don't even know yet." In Sade's family, children didn't run adults. Adults didn't crush children either. There was a line, there was a balance, there was structure, and there was warmth. When Sade was younger, she used to sit on a stool in the kitchen while her aunt braided her hair, listening to grown folks talk about life like it was a class you had to pass. They spoke about pride, about money, about the way the world could try to reduce you if you didn't hold on to yourself. They spoke about the special weight that could land on black girls, the way people watched you, the way they expected you to be strong and silent at the same time. Sade had learned early that being soft didn't mean being weak, and being firm didn't mean being cruel. That belief followed her into everything. It followed her into childcare too. She didn't wake up one day and decide to be a nanny because it sounded cute. She had studied. She had trained. She had worked in classrooms and daycares and after-school programs. She had done the real work, the unglamorous work, the work that didn't come with applause. She had the certifications, the references, the experience with kids who were loud, kids who were shy, kids who had trauma, kids who had too much freedom, kids who had none. She understood development the way some people understood marketing. She could tell when a child was pushing boundaries to test safety, and when a child was acting out because nobody had been willing to sit down and teach them how to name their feelings. She had worked in Atlanta with families who didn't have much, but made sure their children had manners, love, and accountability. She had also worked with families who had money, and that's where she had almost quit for good. Because rich housework wasn't always about caring for children. Sometimes it was about managing adults. Sometimes it was about being used as a shield so parents could avoid showing up. Sometimes it was about being treated like a moving part. Sometimes it was about smiling while people talked to you like you weren't fully human. Sade had taken a high-paying job once in Buckhead, thinking it would help her pay off loans faster. The house was huge. The pantry was full. The child's closet looked like a boutique. And yet the little girl cried every night because her parents were always busy. Every time Sade tried to set a routine, one parent would override her to avoid hearing complaints. Every time she corrected disrespect, the child learned to run to the parent for a different answer. After 3 months, the mother pulled Sade aside and said, like it was a compliment, "You're so good at this. It's like you love her more than we do." Sade had forced a polite smile, but her chest burned, because nobody should say that like it's normal. Nobody should be comfortable outsourcing connection. That night, Sade sat in her small apartment on the south side, looked around at her own modest space, and made herself a promise. She would not spend her life in homes that paid well, but drained her spirit. She would not become a silent helper in a world where money tried to erase dignity. She shifted toward community work, after-school programs, church youth groups, weekend tutoring. It didn't make her rich, but it made her feel real. Kids learned, kids grew, parents partnered, people showed up. And still, sometimes, the agency called. Sometimes a job would come across their list that felt too significant to ignore. Sade slid the snack plate toward Miles and Mason, then placed their homework folders on the table. The boys stared at the folders like they were insults. Sade kept her voice calm. "We're going to do this in steps, 1 page at a time." Miles leaned back. "We don't do homework with nannies." Sade didn't argue. "Today, you do." She pulled out 2 pencils, placed one in front of each boy, then looked at Graham. "This part matters," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear. "If you want a different outcome, you support the routine." Graham nodded once, as if he had already decided he was tired of being a stranger in his own home. Sade turned back to the boys. "Pick a page." Mason hesitated, then flipped one open with reluctant fingers. Sade watched the way his eyes moved. Quick, sharp. He wasn't slow. He wasn't incapable. He was resisting. That confirmed what she already knew. These weren't bad kids. They were kids who didn't feel safe. Not because anyone hit them, not because anyone screamed, but because inconsistency had taught them they had to grab control wherever they could. Sade knew how to handle that, not with fear, with leadership. And Atlanta had taught her leadership early, long before a mansion in Connecticut tried to test it. She wasn't here because she was desperate. She was here because something in her had recognized this situation as the kind that could break children, or build them. She intended to build them, and if she had to confront a billionaire's habits to do it, then so be it. Because Sade didn't come from a culture where you stayed quiet while children suffered. She came from a culture where you stepped in, and you stood up. The first time the agency called about the Whitlock position, Sade almost didn't answer. She had been leaving a community center off Auburn Avenue after a long afternoon of tutoring. The sun was dropping, the air had that familiar Atlanta heaviness, and she was tired in the good way, the way you felt after doing something that mattered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring once, then twice, then she answered with a careful tone. "Hello, Ms. Adeyemi," the voice said, polished and professional. "This is Marlene from Brighthaven Placement. Do you have a moment?" Shad already knew what it was. Agencies didn't call unless they wanted to pull you back into the kind of work that paid well but came with strings. "I have a moment," Sade said, Marlene's tone lifted slightly. We have a family in Connecticut requesting a highly experienced caregiver. It's a live-in position, 2 children, private school, household staff, high security. Sade slowed her steps, eyes narrowing as she crossed toward her car. What's the catch? Marlene laughed lightly, like she expected that question. There's no catch. It's simply a demanding home. That answer always meant there was a catch. Sade unlocked her car, sat in the driver's seat, and let the door close. Tell me what you're not saying. Marlene cleared her throat. The father is a public figure in business circles. He has a strong reputation. The boys have been challenging. There have been several turnovers. Sade's grip tightened on the steering wheel. How many? A brief pause. More than we'd like. Sade let out a slow breath. So I'd be walking into a pattern. Marlene softened her tone. That's why we thought of you. Your references are excellent. Your training is thorough. Families describe you as firm but caring. Sade stared through her windshield at the streetlights beginning to glow. Why are the boys challenging? Marlene hesitated. We were told the family experienced a loss. Sade's chest tightened. Loss could shape children in ways adults refuse to face. Loss could turn a home into a quiet war. Any other details? Sade asked. Marlene continued. The father's schedule is intense. He is often traveling. The home has staff, but they need someone who can create consistent routines. Sade leaned back, eyes half-lidded. She could already picture it. Big house, quiet halls, staff, trained to avoid conflict. Children acting out because attention came only when things went wrong. Marlene added, the compensation is generous. Sade almost laughed. How generous? Marlene said the number. Sade went still. For a second, she honestly thought she misheard. That's monthly, Sade said, voice low. Yes. Marlene replied quickly, like she expected Sade to argue it up. Plus bonuses, plus travel allowance, plus health coverage. Sade stared at the dashboard. That kind of money could change her life. It could clear debt. It could support family. It could fund the community work she cared about without her always living on tight margins. But she wasn't young and naive anymore. High pay meant high cost. What happened to the previous caregivers? Sade asked. Marlene's voice shifted. Some left due to stress. Some felt the household wasn't aligned. One requested to be reassigned after a conflict with the children. Sade's mind flashed to the foyer, to Miles and Mason's words, to how quickly they went for threats. That kind of behavior wasn't born in a day. Sade closed her eyes for a moment, hearing her grandmother's voice inside her head. Don't chase a check into a place that steals your peace. She opened her eyes again. I'm not interested in being disrespected. Marlene sounded relieved, like she had been waiting for Sade to say exactly that. That's why this family needs you. The father specifically asked for someone who would not be intimidated by money or status. Sade's eyebrows lifted. He asked for that. Yes. He said he wants stability, and he knows he can't get it with someone who is afraid of the boys. Sade sat in silence, weighing it. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Would I have authority? Marlene answered carefully. You would have responsibility. Authority depends on the father supporting you. Sade gave a short, humorless laugh. So I'd be gambling. Marlene tried again. He's willing to meet your conditions. Sade stared at her steering wheel, then looked up. Send me the details, all of them. And schedule a call with him, not an assistant. Him? Marlene sounded surprised. You want to speak directly? Yes, Sade said, because I don't walk into a home blind, and I don't agree to a job where I'm expected to be quiet and grateful. They scheduled the call. When Graham finally got on the line days later, he sounded like he was in motion, multitasking, giving her attention with half his mind. Sade had heard that before. She didn't play nice. She asked direct questions about routines, boundaries, school, staff roles, what the boys struggled with, and what he expected from her. Graham gave polished answers at first, then grew quieter as he realized she wasn't impressed by titles. Sade told him her conditions without apology. No undermining, no fear tactics, no blaming her when children pushed back. Cameras on in common areas for everyone's safety, including hers. clear schedule expectations, and one more thing. You will be present daily, she told him, not as an occasional reward, as a habit. There was a silence on the line. Then Graham said, I can commit to structured time. Sade didn't let him off the hook. Not structured. Present. Another pause. Present, he repeated. Sade knew, even then, that his promise would be tested. But she also knew something else. The agency wasn't just offering money. It was offering a challenge. A chance to change a household that was slowly breaking children. Sade could have stayed in Atlanta, safe in community work that fulfilled her. She could have avoided rich house chaos forever. But she kept picturing two little boys learning the wrong kind of power. And she kept picturing a father who used money to cover his guilt. And she kept thinking, if the right adult doesn't step in, those kids will carry this into the world. So she said yes. Not because the salary was big. Because the stakes were bigger. Back in the Connecticut kitchen, Sade watched Miles push the homework page away with a scowl, and Mason grip his pencil like he was ready to snap it in half. Sade didn't react emotionally. She had rules, and her rules weren't complicated. They were built on respect. She leaned slightly forward so the boys felt her attention without feeling trapped. Here's how this works, she said. You can be upset. You can be frustrated. You can tell me you don't like something. What you cannot do is disrespect, threaten, or refuse responsibilities. Miles rolled his eyes. You keep saying threaten. Sade stayed calm. Because you did it. And because you will not do it again. Graham shifted in his chair, as if he wanted to speak, then stopped. He was listening, learning. Sade's code had 4 pillars, and she lived them without speeches. First was respect, which meant children spoke to staff like humans, not servants. It also meant staff spoke to children like they mattered, not like burdens. Second was routine, because routine gave kids safety. Inconsistent homes created anxious children, and anxious children often acted like tyrants when what they really wanted was reassurance. Third was boundaries, because boundaries were the fence that protected love. Without boundaries, affection became bribery. Without boundaries, rules became optional. Without boundaries, children became adults too early, forced to manage feelings they didn't understand. Fourth was no fear-based caregiving. She did not use humiliation. She did not use shouting as a tool. She did not use threats to force compliance. She used clarity, consequences, and calm follow-through. Fear might create silence, but it did not create growth. Sade tapped the homework page lightly with one finger. Miles read the first question. Miles glared. No. Sade nodded. Okay. Anything else you enjoy until the work is done. That includes screens, games, dessert, and outside play. Miles's mouth opened. That's not fair. Sade's voice stayed level. It's fair, because you know the rule. Mason looked at Graham again. Dad. Graham hesitated. That hesitation was the weak spot Sade had warned him about. The moment guilt could turn into permission. Sade didn't jump in fast. She let Graham face the choice. Graham cleared his throat. Do what Sade said. Mason blinked, like he didn't expect that. Sade didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply moved to the next step. Mason, she said, you start question 1. Miles, you can either join, or you can sit quietly while your brother works. Either way, we're staying at this table. Miles stared at his father. Graham met his eyes. Miles. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Miles picked up his pencil with slow anger. The kind of anger that was really disappointment in disguise. Sade saw it clearly. He wanted his father's attention, and he had been taught the quickest way to get it was conflict. So Sade gave him a different path. As he started writing, she lowered her voice slightly, speaking like a guide rather than an enemy. You're smart, she said. This isn't about ability. It's about attitude. And you're going to learn to lead yourself. Miles muttered, whatever. Sade nodded. You don't have to like it today. You do have to do it. That was her code. Calm repetition of the expectation, without emotional chase. She watched them work for a few minutes, correcting gently, praising effort without flattery. She didn't overdo compliments because kids like this had learned to manipulate praise. She made praise specific. "Good focus," she said when Mason stayed on task. "Nice job fixing that mistake," she told Miles when he erased and corrected without throwing the pencil. Graham watched it all, and something in his face shifted, as if he was realizing parenting didn't have to be chaos or guilt. It could be simple, steady work. Shad's boundaries extended beyond the kids too. After the homework page was completed, she looked at Graham and said, 10 minutes. Like we agreed. Graham glanced toward the hallway, as if his phone might call him. Then he looked back and nodded. Sade stood. "I'll be nearby, but this is your time. No screens, no distractions. Ask them about their day. Play something simple." Miles looked suspicious. "For real?" Graham exhaled. "For real." Sade stepped back, giving space, but she stayed within sight, not hovering, simply present. Her job wasn't to replace a parent. It was to restore a home. As Graham leaned closer to his sons, awkward at first, Shad felt the tension in the house shift again. The staff moved differently. Less fear, more curiosity, like they were watching a miracle in plain clothing. Sade's personal code wasn't fancy. It was what her community had taught her. If you love children, you guide them. If you guide them, you show up. If you show up, you stay consistent. And if someone tries to run you with intimidation, you don't bow. You teach them how to live. That is why she was here. Not just to manage 2 twins, but to help a father learn how to become the kind of man his sons could trust, and to help 2 little boys learn that real power wasn't in threats, money, or names. Real power was in character. The Whitlock neighborhood sat behind iron gates and trimmed hedges that looked like they were maintained on a schedule tighter than most people's workdays. The road leading in curved gently, lined with tall trees that kept their distance from one another, like even nature understood privacy here. Every house looked important, without looking friendly. Large, controlled, silent. Shad noticed all of that the first morning she stepped outside with a cup of tea, while the twins ate breakfast inside. No dogs barking wildly, no kids riding bikes in the street, no neighbors waving across lawns, just quiet. The kind of quiet that came from money, not peace. Inside the Whitlock house, there were rules, but they weren't written anywhere. They lived in behavior, in posture, in tone, in what people didn't say. Staff moved softly, not because noise was forbidden, but because attention could bring trouble. Doors closed carefully. Dishes were placed gently, never clattered. Conversations stopped the second footsteps approached. Everyone had learned how to read the air, how to sense mood, how to anticipate reactions. Maria explained some of it without explaining it. "Breakfast is usually at 8, she said while setting plates. "Unless Mr. Whitlock travels early. Then it's flexible." Flexible meant unpredictable. "The boys usually have activities after school," Maria continued. "Unless they don't feel like it." That phrase carried weight. Sade observed without interrupting, watching how the twins tested every interaction. They knocked chairs back harder than necessary. They asked for juice, then complained about the juice. They ignored a staff member's request, then looked to see who would step in. Nobody did. That was the pattern. Chaos didn't arrive as noise first. It arrived as permission. The twins had learned that if they pushed just enough, adults retreated. If they escalated, adults avoided. If they crossed a line, adults smoothed it over to keep the peace. Sade watched Mason spill cereal on the counter, not by accident, then stare at the mess like it was a dare. A housekeeper stepped forward, then stopped herself. Sade moved calmly. "Mason," she said, "you spill it, you clean it." Mason blinked. "That's not my job." Sade didn't correct his tone yet. "It becomes your job when you make the mess." The housekeeper froze, like she wasn't sure who to listen to. Mason glanced around, looking for rescue. None came. Sade handed him a cloth. The moment passed quietly, but it mattered. Because this house had been teaching the twins that messes disappeared without effort, that mistakes were someone else's problem, that power meant immunity. Staff walking on eggshells wasn't because they disliked the boys. It was because they had been burned before. Every new caregiver came in hopeful. Everyone left exhausted. Some cried, some quit suddenly, some were quietly let go after conflict. Their exit framed as not the right fit. The house didn't change. The faces did. Sade saw it clearly now. The Whitlock home wasn't lacking money, resources, or structure. It was lacking leadership, and children filled that vacuum the only way they knew how. By pushing until something held. So far, nothing had. That was why the house felt rich, but hollow. Because order without connection was just decoration. And the twins had been decorating their pain with disruption. Sade understood the stakes immediately. If she backed down, she would become another name in a list. If she stayed firm, the house would push back. Not just the kids, the system. Graham Whitlock looked different depending on where you saw him. In public, he was sharp, controlled, confident, the kind of man whose name opened doors before he touched them. His reputation carried weight in boardrooms, in donor circles, in quiet rooms where influence moved without announcements. Articles described him as decisive, focused, visionary. Interviews praised his discipline. No one talked about his home life. Inside the Whitlock house, Graham existed more as a schedule than a presence. Sade noticed it the second day. A driver arrived early, then waited. A bag was placed by the door. Maria checked the clock twice. Graham came down the stairs already on a call, voice smooth, eyes not quite here. He kissed the top of Mason's head without stopping. Miles tried to speak. "Dad." "Later," Graham said gently, but his phone stayed glued to his ear. Later rarely came. He left with purpose, with intention, with the sense of a man going where he was needed. Except the place he left behind needed him most. Sade watched the boy's shoulders sink the second the door closed. That reaction told her more than any school report. They didn't act out because they were spoiled. They acted out because they were unseen. Graham didn't mean to be absent. That was the most complicated part. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't careless. He simply applied the same logic to fatherhood that had worked everywhere else. Hire well, delegate, fix problems with money and efficiency. But children weren't companies, and grief didn't follow quarterly goals. Sade noticed how Graham avoided certain rooms. A closed door at the end of a hallway. A framed photo turned slightly inward. A silence that settled when certain dates approached. Loss lived here, unaddressed. The twins carried it differently. One became loud, the other became guarded. Both became restless. Graham carried it by staying busy. He filled his days so thoroughly, there was no room left for stillness. Stillness made space for memory. Memory made space for pain. So he stayed moving, and the house learned to move around his absence. Sade clocked all of it. The way staff straightened when Graham entered, not with warmth, but with readiness. The way the boys watched him like they were memorizing a rare event. The way conversations paused when his footsteps approached. Graham wasn't feared. He was untouchable. And untouchable parents often raise children who tried to break everything just to feel contact. Sade didn't judge him for it. She assessed, because understanding was the first step toward change. By the end of her third day, Sade had mapped the Whitlock house in her mind. Not the floor plan, the emotional layout. She knew which staff member had stopped offering opinions. She knew which hallway the twins avoided at night. She knew which routines were strongest and which were fragile. And she knew grief lived here quietly, like a guest nobody wanted to acknowledge. The twins didn't talk about it directly, but it showed up in questions they didn't finish, in jokes that landed wrong, in sudden anger that made no sense until you looked deeper. Sade noticed the way Mason flinched at raised voices, even when they weren't angry. She noticed the way Miles pushed boundaries hardest right before bedtime, when the house went quiet and thoughts got loud. She noticed the absence of photographs from certain years. Leadership was missing, not because Graham didn't care, but because he hadn't known how to lead through loss. Staff had adapted by becoming invisible. The house had adapted by becoming quiet. The children had adapted by becoming difficult. Sade filled in the gaps without announcing herself. She placed a simple schedule on the refrigerator, handwritten, not printed, because printed rules felt impersonal. She spoke to staff respectfully, asking questions instead of issuing orders, letting them feel safe again. She sat with the twins during quiet moments, not forcing conversation, just being present. She corrected behavior immediately, calmly, every time, so expectations stayed clear. She didn't shame. She didn't threaten. She didn't negotiate away boundaries. And slowly, the house responded, not with perfection, with adjustment. Graham noticed it too, though he didn't name it yet. Dinners lasted longer. The twins argued less loudly. Staff spoke a little more freely. The house didn't feel healed, but it felt awake. Shad knew leadership wasn't about control. It was about consistency. And consistency, once introduced, made absence stand out sharply. Sooner or later, Graham would have to face that, because a house could not run on structure alone. It needed presence, and presence could not be delegated. Sade didn't know yet how Graham would respond when the truth pressed harder, but she knew this. The Whitlock house was no longer asleep, and once a place like this woke up, it either changed fully or fought to return to silence. The shift did not announce itself loudly. It arrived the way resistance always did, quietly at first, wearing a familiar face. By the fourth afternoon, Miles and Mason had learned something important about Shad. She did not argue. She did not bargain. She did not get rattled. And because of that, they changed tactics. The tests stopped being obvious. They became strategic. It started in the playroom. A puzzle dumped out, not in excitement, but with intention. Pieces scattered under the couch, beneath the shelves, pressed into corners where staff usually cleaned without comment. Mason watched Sade from the corner of his eye while he did it, pretending not to care. Sade noticed immediately. She did not react. She finished wiping down the art table, folded the cloth once, placed it neatly on the counter, then turned toward him. "Mason," she said evenly, "you dumped the puzzle." Mason shrugged. "It fell." Sade nodded. "Then you'll pick it up." He didn't move. Miles, seated nearby, smirked. "We didn't dump it together." Sade met his eyes. "I didn't say you did." Miles' smirk faded. That wasn't the response he expected. Mason kicked one piece under the couch with his heel. "I don't want to." Sade walked to the couch, knelt, retrieved the piece, and placed it in Mason's palm. "You don't have to want to," she said. "You do have to be responsible for what you start." Mason frowned. "Maria usually does it." Maria froze near the doorway, eyes flicking nervously between Sade and the child. Sade stood. "Maria is not your cleanup crew." The room went still, because that sentence named something everyone had been dancing around. Mason's voice sharpened. "You're not the boss of the house." Shad nodded. "Correct. I am the boss of expectations while you're in my care." Miles laughed, louder now. "Dad's not going to like this." Sade didn't look at him. "Your father hired me because he wants this." Miles tilted his head. "He won't keep you." That was the push. The same old lever. Sade turned fully to face him now, her voice steady, not raised. "If your father chooses comfort over growth, that's his decision. But I will not change what's right to protect my job." The boys stared at her. They had not met many adults who spoke like that. That evening, the tests continued. Dinner napkins dropped and not retrieved. Food pushed to the edge of plates. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor. Then came the real attempt. After dinner, while Sade was helping Mason with reading practice, Miles stood, walked toward the hallway, and said casually, "I'm bored. I'm going to my room." Sade looked up. "We agreed. Reading time first." Miles kept walking. "I don't agree." He reached the stairs. This was the moment other caregivers had lost control. Yelled, pleaded, chased, given in. Sade did none of those. She stood, walked to the base of the stairs, and spoke clearly. "Miles," she said, "come back to the table." He stopped halfway up. "Or what?" he shot back. Sade held his gaze. "Or, you lose your game time tomorrow, and we will finish this work together now." Miles' voice rose. "You can't tell me what to do." Sade didn't blink. "I already did." Silence stretched. Staff hovered out of sight, listening. Upstairs, A door closed softly. Miles took one more step upward. That was when Sade said his name again, not louder, but firmer. Miles. Something in her tone cut through. He stopped, not because he was scared, because he was being seen. Sade stepped closer, not invading space, but closing distance enough to be present. "You are not bad," she said, "but you are choosing poorly right now. And choices have outcomes." Miles clenched his fists. "You just want to control us." Sade shook her head. "No. I want you to learn to control yourselves." That sentence landed differently. Miles stood there, breathing hard, then slowly turned and walked back down the stairs. Not slamming, not shouting, walking. Mason watched him, wide-eyed. The puzzle pieces were still on the floor. Sade pointed gently. "Clean up, both of you." They did, not quickly, not happily, but they did. And that was new. Later that night, Sade sat with the twins on the rug in their room, backs against the bed, reading lamps casting a warm glow. This was usually the time when chaos peaked, when fatigue loosened restraint, when old habits returned. Miles leaned his head against the mattress. "You're mean." Sade didn't bristle. "You feel upset." "That's not what I said." "I know," Sade replied calmly. "But that's what you meant." Mason looked between them. "Why do you care so much?" Sade closed the book gently. "Because someone has to." Miles scoffed. "Dad doesn't even stay home." There it was. The truth slipped out when defenses were tired. Sade did not rush to correct him. She did not soften it away. She acknowledged it. "That hurts," she said. "And instead of saying that, you throw things, you threaten people, you try to run the house. That doesn't make the hurt disappear. It just spreads it." Miles stared at the ceiling. "He always leaves." Sade nodded. "Yes. And that makes you angry." Mason's voice cracked. "And sad." Sade's tone stayed gentle. "Those feelings don't make you weak, but how you handle them matters." Miles rolled onto his side. "Nobody listens." "I'm listening," Sade said. They went quiet. Then she added, "But listening doesn't mean letting you hurt people." She explained consequences again, not as punishment, but as structure. She explained why lying destroyed trust, why messes belonged to the person who made them, why threats damage safety for everyone. She spoke to them like humans, not problems. When Miles tried to interrupt, she raised a hand calmly. "You will let me finish," she said. "Then you can respond." He did. For the first time, he waited. Mason asked quietly, "If we mess up, do you leave?" Sade's chest tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "No. I correct you. I stay." That answer changed something, not loudly, deeply. Upstairs, Graham stood in his office doorway, phone untouched in his hand. He had planned to review documents. He had planned to return messages. Instead, he listened, not through cameras this time, through sound carrying up the staircase. He heard his son's voices, stripped of performance. He heard Saad's calm presence, unhurried, unwavering, and he felt something settle heavily in his chest. Guilt, because he recognized the moments she was handling, the moments he had missed, the questions he had avoided, the discomfort he had escaped by staying busy. Surprise followed, not at the boys. At Saad, she wasn't doing anything dramatic. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply doing the work, and relief came last. Because for the first time since loss reshaped his home, Graham felt like someone competent was holding the emotional center of his house, not replacing him, stabilizing what he had let wobble. He stayed where he was, listening until the room fell quiet. Then he stepped back, closed his office door softly, and sat down, not to work, to think. The next morning, something small happened. Miles put his shoes away without being asked. Mason cleared his plate. When Sade gave an instruction, they complained less loudly, not because they feared her, because they understood her. Clarity had replaced chaos. Rules were no longer weapons. They were anchors. When Mason forgot and reached for a tablet early, Sade removed it without drama. "We agreed," she said. Mason frowned, then nodded. Later came. That mattered. Miles tested again in the afternoon, then stopped himself halfway through a comment. Sade noticed, but didn't praise it excessively. She simply said, "Good choice." That was enough. For the first time, the twins followed direction without pushing to see what would break. Not because they were suddenly easy, because someone finally made the expectations clear and kept them steady. Upstairs, Graham watched it unfold in pieces. And something in him shifted too, because this was not discipline through fear. This was leadership through consistency. And it was working. The house settled into evening the way it always did now. Not loud, not tense, just steady. Dinner dishes were cleared. Homework folders were stacked neatly. The twins moved through their routines with less resistance, still testing at the edges, but no longer crashing into every wall to see what would fall. Sade wiped down the kitchen counter and glanced at the clock. 10 minutes had passed. Then 12. She didn't remind Graham this time. She watched instead. Graham sat on the living room floor with Miles and Mason, a deck of cards spread between them. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled. He looked awkward, like a man learning a language late in life, careful with every move. The boys argued about the rules. Graham corrected them, gently but firmly, surprising even himself. When the timer chimed, Mason looked up. "Is it over?" Graham hesitated. Then he smiled slightly. "One more round." Sade clocked that moment and filed it away. Later, when the twins were upstairs brushing their teeth, Graham stepped into the kitchen and cleared his throat. "Shad." She turned, drying her hands on a towel. "Yes, I wanted to thank you," he said. "For today, for the last few days." His voice was polite, measured, grateful in the way men used to authority often were, offering appreciation without vulnerability. Shad nodded. "You're welcome." Graham waited, as if expecting more. When none came, he continued. "They've been calmer." "Yes," Sade said. "Consistency does that." Another pause. Graham leaned against the counter, folding his arms loosely. "I don't usually interfere with caregivers." Sade met his eyes. "I noticed." He didn't take offense. If anything, he looked relieved that she named it without drama. "I hire competent people," he said. "I trust them to do their job." Saad's tone stayed neutral. Children don't need trust alone. They need alignment. Graham absorbed that quietly. He thanked her again, nodded once, and turned as if to leave. That was the moment Shady spoke. "Mr. Whitlock." He stopped. "If we're going to work together," she said calmly, "we should talk." Graham turned back, guarded instinctively rising. "About expectations," Shad replied. "Mine. And yours." He studied her, the way he studied people in negotiations, weighing risk and reward. "Now," he said. Shad gestured toward the dining table. "Sit." He did. Sade did not rush. She sat across from Graham, hands folded, posture relaxed but firm. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a boundary. "I want to be clear," she said. "I'm not here to be blamed for pushback. Children push back when routines change. That does not mean the approach is wrong." Graham nodded slowly. "I understand. I also won't be positioned as the problem when your sons struggle with emotions that existed before I arrived," she continued. "I can guide them, I can support them, but I cannot replace a parent, and I will not absorb frustration meant for circumstances beyond my control." Graham's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but recognition. "That hasn't happened," he said carefully. "Not yet," Sade replied. "I'm preventing it." Silence followed. Graham exhaled. "You're direct." "Yes. And you're not afraid of losing this job." Sade met his gaze. "I don't work from fear." That landed. Graham leaned back. "What do you need from me?" Sade appreciated the shift. Less defense, more listening. "I need partnership," she said. "Not performance, not occasional agreement. Partnership." She explained what that meant without preaching. Supporting consequences in the moment, not reversing rules out of guilt, not disappearing during hard weeks, not allowing staff to undermine structure to keep things comfortable. Graham listened closely, nodding at points, frowning at others. "You're asking me to change how I parent," he said. "I'm asking you to start," Sade replied gently. He didn't flinch. Instead, He looked down at the table for a long moment. I'm not good at being here, he admitted quietly. The words surprised him, as much as they surprised her. I know how to show up in meetings, Graham continued. I know how to lead teams. I know how to manage crises. But when I walk through that door, I feel like I'm already behind. Sade listened without interrupting. They look at me like I owe them something I can't repay, he said. And maybe I do. Sade nodded once. Children don't keep score the way adults do. They just want consistency. Graham rubbed his hands together slowly. I thought providing stability was enough. It's part of it, Sade said. But presence is the part they feel. He swallowed. I avoid being home because I don't want to mess it up. That's understandable, Sade replied. But absence messes it up too. Graham let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh. You make it sound simple. It is simple, she said. Not easy. Simple. He looked at her then, really looked at her, not as an employee, not as a solution, but as a woman who had just named the thing he'd been avoiding. I don't want to fail them, he said. Sade's voice softened. Then show up imperfectly. That matters more than showing up rarely. The house was quiet around them. Upstairs, the twins laughed over something small. That sound reached the kitchen like a reminder. Graham nodded slowly. Tell me what to do. Sade didn't hesitate. She had been ready for this. 10 minutes, she said, every day. Same time. No phone, no laptop, no interruptions unless there's an emergency. Graham frowned. 10 minutes. Yes, Sade said. Short enough that you won't avoid it. Long enough that they'll feel it. He considered that. And if I miss a day, you don't, she replied. If you're traveling, you call. Video if you have to. Eye contact matters. Graham nodded again. What else? You don't negotiate rules in front of them, Sade said. If you disagree with me, we discuss it privately. Children split adults when adults let them. That makes sense. You don't compensate with gifts, she added. No buying forgiveness.